Hi guys, welcome to another video. Hope you're all keeping well. Now in this video I'd like to talk about my Christopher Lee Dracula collection. As you probably know, if you've looked at my previous videos, I am a huge fan of Christopher Lee, especially when he plays Count Dracula. So I just thought I'd show you all the, well, actually not surprised I've got them all, but I just thought I'd just show you my collection. So first off is Dracula from 1958, Christopher Lee's debut as the the evil Count. Utterly awesome movie. Christopher Lee for me is the definitive Count Dracula, and I mean, this movie is just perfect in every way. It really is. I'll just read you the list of special features on this edition. High definition main feature, BFI 2007 restoration. HD main feature, Hammer 2012 restoration, new audio commentary with Marcus Hearn and Jonathan Rigby, both guys who certainly know their stuff when it comes to commenting on horror movies. And special features, there's actually two discs on this one. DVD disc 1, the main feature, BFI 2007 restoration, main feature, Hammer 2012 restoration, new audio commentary, Marcus Hearn and Jonathan Rigby. And at disc 2, special features, Dracula Reborn, new documentary about the film's creation and history, featuring Jimmy Sangster, Mark Gatiss, Jonathan Rigby, Kim Newman and Janina Fay. Resurrecting Dracula, new documentary about the film's restoration, including the integration of the lost footage. Censoring Dracula, new documentary on the original cuts to the film ordered by the British Board of Film Censors. The Demon Lover, Christopher Frayling on Dracula, very good documentary. All 4 surviving Japanese reels, 6 to 9 unrestored. The World of Hammer, Dracula and the Undead. Janine Fay reads Stoker at the Vault Festival. Stills gallery of over 100 fully restored and rare images. Booklet by Hammer archivist Robert E. Simpson in PDF format on the DVD only. And finally, the original shooting script also on PDF. Now, as I say, guys, this really is my all-time favourite Dracula movie. I don't care what anybody says. Christopher Lee was the best Dracula ever, and in my mind, he always will be. Nobody could take him, and he would take him off, quite like Christopher Lee. And as I said in the previous video, his was the only Count Dracula that actually terrified me. When I first watched him as a kid, many years ago, growing up in the late 60s. So yeah, that's the first one, and the transfer on this is awesome. I mean, it really is. So there you go, Hammer's first Dracula movie, starring the great Christopher Lee from 1958. Next one is Dracula Prince of Darkness. Again, another awesome movie, starring Christopher Lee as Count Dracula. This takes place nearly 10 years after the original, the original Count Dracula 1958. There was another Dracula movie before this and in between, the Hammer 1958 Dracula, and that was Brides of Dracula, which starred David Peel as a kind of Dracula type character. But anyway, this is another great edition. This one is this is a collector's edition by Screen Factory, and I'll just read you the special features on this one. New 4K scan of the original film elements. New audio commentary with author Troy Howarth. Audio commentary by Christopher Lee himself, Susan Farmer, Francis Matthews and Barbara Shelley. The World of Hammer episode Dracula and the Undead. Documentary Back to Black. Theatrical trailer and stills gallery. So yeah, as I say, this is another fantastic Dracula movie starring the great Christopher Lee. Peter Cushing isn't actually in this one, but despite that, it's still a very good movie. And you've got Francis Matthews and the priest Father Sandor, who takes over, as Dracula's arch enemies. And there's one particular scene in this movie what I think is one of the most horrifying scenes in horror history. It's the part when the four guests staying at Dracula's castle, and Alan goes outside to investigate a noise. He thinks it's Clove, and Clove ambushes. Charles Tingwell plays Alan, by the way. And Clove is lurking, and he actually kills Alan, and he strings him up over Dracula's remains. Dracula's powdered remains is all in this huge sarcophagus, or crypt, if you like, stone coffin, and he strings him up and he slits his throat, and as he slits his throat, all blood trickles down onto Dracula's ashes. Oh, it's just awesome. That scene terrified me when I first watched it as a kid, and also shocked many other horror, you know, horror fans as well. Just one of the most memorable scenes in Hammer horror movie history. Yeah. So as I say, that's Dracula, Prince of Darkness. Next one, which is the third movie in the Christopher Lee series of Dracula movies, is Dracula Has Risen from the Grave. Again, another superb movie starring Christopher Lee, and I think this is the one out of all the Dracula movies. I think this is the one that I've watched the most times. It stars the gorgeous Veronica Carlson as Maria, and it's just a fantastic story. It really is. Rupert Davis plays a man clergyman. And you've got like Ewan Hooper, who plays the evil priest. Well, at first he's sort of like, he's okay to begin with, but once Dracula hypnotizes him, he becomes evil, and he responds to Dracula's every his bidding and that. But this is a fantastic movie. It really is. Made in 1968. Very good movie. Unfortunately, there's no extras on this one. Directed by Freddie Francis, produced by Ada Young, screenplay by John Elder. Yeah, a village trembles in fear. A priest forsakes his vows in the service of evil. Young beauties fall victim to a mysterious seducer, and each night brings the threat of death because Dracula has risen from the grave. So there you go, guys. The third movie in the Christopher Lee series of Dracula movies. That is Dracula Has Risen from the Grave. Next one. Another great Christopher Lee Dracula movie is Taste the Blood of Dracula. Again, I mean, I could, there's so many superlatives I could voice about this movie. Again, it's just a fantastic script. Great performance by Christopher Lee as Count Dracula. This actually follows off directly from Dracula Has Risen from the Grave, where, if you've seen the movie, you'll remember Dracula perished he was impaled on a huge crucifix, and he fell on the crucifix, and it went right through his back and out through his chest. And just what an iconic scene in horror movie history. It really is. So this carries on from Dracula Has Risen from the Grave, where as a salesman, businessman, he gets thrown out of a coach, and he stumbles on Dracula writhing and screaming in the forest and that, and of course the businessman's actually played by Roy Kinnear, if you remember from Inside Marcus Welby, and he was also in Man About the House. He played the handyman. But yeah, so he stumbles on Dracula's he sees Dracula dying in the woods and that, and then he takes all his belongings and that, and he sells them to these three businessmen, at the request of Lord Courtly, Ralph Bates, who encouraged them to take part in this kind of ritual, promise them, like, the world will be theirs if they sell themselves. But anyway, I won't go on too much about it. If you haven't seen Taste the Blood of Dracula, I highly recommend it. It's another fantastic Christopher Lee movie. Yeah. 1969, directed by Peter Sasdy, produced by Ada Young, stars John Carson, Jeffrey Keane, Peter Sallis, and the lovely Linda Hayden's in this as well. So yeah, another fine Dracula movie from the great Christopher Lee. That is Taste the Blood of Dracula. Next one. Now this movie gets a lot of stick from some fans, but I think it's a fantastic movie. Despite the the special effects with the vampire bats and that. This is The Scars of Dracula. Now this is the first Christopher Lee Dracula movie that breaks continuity, from the previous Dracula movies, because whereas in Taste the Blood of Dracula he perished in the church, the protagonist, like Paul, he sort of like put all holy things inside the church and sort of like revived the religious ambience of the church, and when Dracula tried to flee, it sort of like affected Dracula, and he fell to his death. I mean, a lot of people have attacked that ending as well, but I thought it added to the movie Taste the Blood of Dracula. But this one, we find the Count back in his castle in Transylvania, and how he's revived in this one, you get this a large vampire bat coming into Dracula's castle and spewing blood, actually spewing, regurgitating blood all over Dracula's ashes, and then of course all hell breaks loose as the Count is revived, and he's not too pleased about the villagers trying to burn his castle down and that, So, but anyway, yeah, and this has got like Jenny Hanley, another fine actress, a very, very beautiful lady. She's been in many movies. She actually hosted Magpie in the 70s for a couple of years, and you've got a very young Dennis Waterman as the protagonist, who comes to Dracula's castle in search of his brother, who's mysteriously gone missing. So yeah, I think, I say, despite the flack it gets, I think Scars of Dracula it's quite a very, you know, it's a good movie, you know. I mean, and you get to see more of Christopher Lee in this one as well. You know, he talks more and that, and then he's actually more sadistic in this one, because not only does he stab one of his servants to death in the castle, he just comes, he pulls the curtains back, and he just stabs it to death, brutally stabs it to death with this huge knife, in a style like a slasher movie and that, you know. He not only does he do that, but he also his servant Clove, played by Patrick Troughton, he also takes a red hot poker to and brands his back and that, you know, for disobeying his order. So yeah, you see, you know, as I say, you get to see much more of Count Dracula in this one. Yeah, I love The Scars of Dracula. This is a Studio Canal release. This does have some special features on. In Scars of Dracula, Christopher Lee returned to his most famous role for the 5th time, and director Roy Ward Baker created the unprecedented shot of the Count scaling his castle walls. Now that's from the Bram Stoker novel, where Count Dracula scales his castle walls like a large human lizard. Very creepy scene. This was the last of Hammer's traditional Dracula films and the bloodiest entry in the entire series. Well, what they mean by that is this was the last Hammer Dracula starring Christopher Lee, but it was set in the Victorian era. The last 2 Dracula movies were set in modern times, but we're going to move on to them in a minute. There's a few special features on this one. New featurette, Blood Rights Inside the Scars of Dracula, original trailer. Scream Factory's also done a release of The Scars of Dracula, which has additional commentary by Christopher Lee. So that might be worth a good pickup for you. So yeah, Scars of Dracula, made in 1970. Got the penultimate Hammer Dracula movie now, Christopher Lee, and that movie is Dracula AD 1972. Again, another truly fabulous movie starring Christopher Lee as Count Dracula. In this one, as you can gather from the title, is the Count's revived in modern day swinging London of 1972, and as I say, it provides a different ambience to the story of Count Dracula and that, you know. I just love this movie. Carolyn Monroe's in it, Stephanie Beacham, and Peter Cushing comes back, and you know, so he's in it as well. So it's good to see Peter Cushing back as a descendant of the original, you know, Abraham Van Helsing. And I love the way this movie starts as well, because it opens up where, like, there's a runaway coach going through the park. I think it's Hyde Park, and Van Helsing, played by Peter Cushing, and Christopher Lee, sort of like having a big fight to the death and that, and they're battling each other on the coach and that, you know. And the coach has got, it's like a runaway coach just going right through Hyde Park and that, and then the coach overturns. I think it crashes into a tree, and as the coach overturns, the 2 you know, antagonists are thrown off the coach, and then like you get, like, I think that's a very creepy scene where you get, like, you see the coach overturn, and then you see Christopher Lee's face come slowly round the end of the coach and that, and you know, his eyes and that, and blood. Oh, it's one of the finest scenes in Hammer horror history. And then of course you have a last fight to the death and that, and Abraham Van Helsing, although he impales Christopher Lee, you know, on a wooden spoke of a wagon wheel, unfortunately he also loses his life. But then you've got his descendants in modern day London, you know, played by Peter Cushing again. So yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed Dracula AD 1972, you know, very good movie. And last but by not means least, the last Christopher Lee Dracula Hammer movie is The Satanic Rites of Dracula. Now, this is a direct follow-up to Dracula AD. This takes place exactly 1 year after the events of Dracula AD 1972. Now, in this movie, Dracula, it's sort of like, I tend to describe this as the James Bond Dracula, because there's a lot of elements in it that are reminiscent of what you'd see in a James Bond movie, you know, like the secret agents and that, and all the political intrigue and that, you know. And it's quite a slow burner, but once it gets underway, you know, you're thoroughly entertaining, it really is. And again, Christopher Lee's revived by black magic means, a black magic ritual. And yeah, and Peter Cushing's back again in the role of Van Helsing. You know, it's good to see him back again. But in this movie, it's what's her name is I think it's his granddaughter is played by Joanna Lumley. You know, from who remember from Absolutely Fabulous, you know, and she's done a lot of work with the Gigas and that, and of course she was also in the New Avengers, you know, in 1976 parody. So yeah, this is a very good end to the Christopher Lee Hammer Dracula saga, I think, you know, because again it's set in London and that, but as I say, it's got more of a James Bond sort of like atmosphere to it and that, you know. There's no special features on this one, unfortunately. So yeah. Also stars William Franklin, Freddie Jones, Joanna Lumley. Screenplay by Don Houghton, produced by Roy Skeggs and directed by Alan Gibson from Warner Brothers. So yeah, in the light of the current situation, flicking the world with the coronavirus, this is quite a relevant movie, because in this movie, not only does Dracula seek to sort of like vampirize everybody in sight, he also has an abominable desire to destroy the whole world, taking himself as well with it, by means of the bubonic plague or the Black Death. So what he does, he sort of like gets all these professors, these leading moguls and that, and he tries to sort of like, as I say, use the Black Death to destroy everything, and including himself, which, I thought was a bit strange, because like, if he destroys everybody, but if he destroys everybody in the world, but he's sort of like, he's still there, what's he going to feed on? But anyway, I mean, you could get into the whys and wherefores of that, you could go on saying about that, but at the end of the day, it's a very good Dracula movie. And as I say, it's good to see Peter Cushing back in the role and that, And this is the very last time Christopher Lee played Dracula, in a Hammer horror movie. And I just love the scene at the end, like, where the final confrontation, like where Christopher Lee, like, Christopher Lee, Dracula and Peter Cushing, Van Helsing again, they have a final confrontation in the forest and that, and Christopher Lee stumbles into a hawthorn. But I won't tell you about the ending in case you haven't, hawthorn bush, but I won't tell you about the ending in case you haven't seen the movie. But I think Satanic Rites of Dracula, although it's different in many ways from traditional Hammer Dracula, it's still a very, very good movie and a fine way to end the Christopher Lee, a series of Dracula movies. Fantastic release as well. I mean, the picture quality on this is superb. It's absolutely impeccable. I mean, I could go on all day, uttering superlatives about the Christopher Lee Dracula movies, because I absolutely love them. I mean, I really do. So it's great to have all these in my collection. I mean, I've watched them, as you can imagine. I've watched them many, many times, and that, I just absolutely love them. As I say, I don't think anybody can beat Christopher Lee when it plays it, playing Count Dracula, because he brought his own sort of style, to the role and that, I mean, all right, Bela Lugosi was good in his day. He was a very good Dracula. But when Christopher Lee first came out in 1958, I mean, he absolutely terrified audiences, like, because nobody had ever seen a Count Dracula quite like his, and you've seen him on the large screen, like with his fangs bared, like, and his eyes. He used to terrify me, like, when I was a little kid, because whenever the blood went into his eyes, I'd always put my hand over my face and that, but of course now, for adults, it doesn't bother me and that, but when I was a kid, like about 8 or 9, like, oh, that part where the blood goes in his eye. I mean, my mum used to say to me, I don't know, she said, you stayed up all night waiting for Count Dracula, and you're not watching, yeah, but I don't like his eyes, but anyway, that's kid stuff and that, but as I say, these are great, fantastic movies. Now, I've just got one more movie to show you, in terms of Christopher Lee playing Count Dracula, and it's not a Hammer movie, it's a Spanish release that was made in 1970, and that is called Count Dracula. Now, this one is it was directed by Jess Franco, and this is more. It is in some ways it's more true to the Bram Stoker novel. But I'll just read you the back anyway, because it's got quite a few special features on this one. In 1970, cult director Jess Franco and screen legend Christopher Lee collaborated on what they promised would be the most faithful adaptation of Bram Stoker's novel ever filmed. From its remarkable performances, including Christopher Lee as the Count, Herbert Lom, who was in Mark of the Devil, as Van Helsing, Soledad Miranda, Vampiros Lesbos as Lucy, Marion Roan, Venus and Fairs as Mina, and the authentic madman Klaus Kinski as Renfield, to its lush locations and atmosphere of sinister sensuality. It remains perhaps the most spellbinding version of Dracula in movie history. Fred Williams, She Killed in Ecstasy, and Paul Muller of Nightmare Castle co-star in this thrilling and fascinating horror classic, now fully restored, loaded with all new bonus features and remastered in high definition for the first time ever. Now I'll just read you the special features on this edition. Special features are Cure-Deck Vampire, Pierre Portabella's expressionistic behind-the-scenes feature film, audio commentary, horror historian David Delval and actress Maria Rom, Beloved Count, an interview with director Jess Franco, A Conversation with Jack Taylor, Handsome Harker, interview with actor Fred Williams, Stakeholders in appreciation of Jess Franco's Count Dracula by filmmaker Christopher Gans, Christopher Lee reads Bram Stoker's Dracula, and finally there's a German trailer. So yeah guys, this was the last, outside of Hammer, this was the, I wouldn't say the last Dracula, because of course he made the two, Dracula AD in 1970, but in between the Hammer movies, 1970, he made this one. So yeah, I do like this movie, but somehow I don't think it quite comes up to the brilliance of the Hammer Dracula movies. I mean, like, it's sort of like a lot of some fans may beg to differ, but I don't think it's quite as, it's not as good as the Hammer Dracula. I thought in the Hammer Dracula movies, Christopher Lee was more scary. He was more, because he had like his red cloak and he had his eyes red and, his fangs and that, but he does a pretty good job in this one. I mean, don't get me wrong, it is a good, it is a good movie, and this is, the picture quality on this is awesome. I mean, I had the old DVD, but I let that go because once I saw this in Blu-ray, I just had to purchase it, so I added to my Christopher Lee Dracula movie. So yeah guys, that's my video about all the Christopher Lee Dracula movies. Again, I say I could go on uttering superlatives about the great man, all afternoon. But I say for me, it was the definitive Count Dracula. I mean, it really was. Nobody can play Count Dracula like Christopher Lee. I mean, he's just awesome. He's got that screen presence, like a lot of character actors and that, and he just brought his own style to the role and that, so yeah, that's me, the Christopher Lee Dracula movies. I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and at some point in the future, I hope to do a video talking about all my Peter Cushing Frankenstein movies that he did for Hammer. Again, a great series, what Hammer did, involving Van Frankenstein. So yeah, so stay tuned for that. Okay, guys, so that's it for now. If you like this video, please feel free to leave your comments down below. And if you want to subscribe to the channel, it's up to you. Hope you have a nice weekend anyway, guys. And as I say, I'll see you soon.